Al's identity crisis has always struck me as strange. After all, up until this point, we've largely seen how much he cares for Ed and how much Ed cares for him. Sure, they might disagree every now and then, and they might argue or fight, but they love and trust one another. That much has held true for 11 chapters of the manga, 8 episodes of Brotherhood, and 22 episodes of 2003. Yet here we are, with Al believing that his memories are somehow false and that Ed created him, because Barry the Chopper planted that thought in his head. Now in Mangahood, this comes out of left field. We simply haven't seen much of Al's doubts and fears about his body. We haven't seen much of how he struggles with this body and of the negative effects it has on him. Of course, we'll see more of that later, but up until now, up until the point where he seriously considers Barry's words, we haven't. Meanwhile, 2003 has spent a bit more time building up to this. We've had more moments where Al's loneliness is highlighted. On top of that, we've had additional moments where we see how Al has to act differently or give things up because of his body. For example, he's forced to drop out of the alchemist exam, as his body would eventually be discovered and then both he and Ed could get in serious trouble. In fact, just the episode prior to this, he was surrounded by creatures who longed to be human, and the show's themes have moved into exploring what it means to be human and where humanity comes from. So the overall context around this is better in 2003, but it still becomes a bit tricky to discuss Al's state, because on a conceptual level, it makes sense. Of course this body makes Al feel isolated. Of course this might be maddening. Of course he might end up acting illogically and being susceptible to lies. Even if some might find the way he acts here to be frustrating, and to a certain degree, I'm one of those people, the very concept of Al's body makes it easy to understand why this idea might come into play. Still, I think all versions could have done more to make this change in character feel natural, to make Al's identity crisis feel a bit more expected. If Al's worries here are going to be this illogical, then it is even more important that the audience has a clear picture of Al's emotional issues. I think this section would have worked far better if we had more moments where Al struggles, where the audience is encouraged to understand him. Even if there's more of those in 2003, I don't think there's enough. If Al's worries made more sense on any sort of factual level, then this wouldn't be as necessary. While this could be done by changing the lie itself, I think changing the source of the lie would also be useful. After all, nothing about Barry is trustworthy. He's an insane serial killer. That's basically all Al knows about him. If this came from someone Al had more familiarity with, that would make this feel far more natural. It also doesn't help that Barry is treated as comedic relief in the scene prior to the lie. If the show itself doesn't seem to take Barry seriously, it becomes harder for the audience to take him seriously, and thus even more difficult to believe that Al should take him seriously. It's for these reasons that I'm not fond of the way Al's identity crisis in and of itself is handled in any version of the story. However, that's not to say that there's nothing good about this section of the story. In fact, there are a number of things I like about the ideas it explores. I just don't like how it frames Al's struggles, and I think a lot more could have been done to make this plot far more emotional and effective. Oddly enough, Al's identity crisis in Mangahood isn't really about Al. It's about Winry, more specifically about how integral Winry is to the brothers' relationship, and how important she is in their lives. First, the way she snaps from angry to quiet and guilty when she learns about how Ed got hurt works really well. It clearly shows how concerned she is for Ed, and that she feels at least somewhat responsible for his well-being. However, I'm not a fan of how she reacts once she realizes that Ed doesn't know that his arm locking up is her fault. She quickly agrees that she did nothing wrong and covers up her mistake. This exchange has an overall comedic tone, and though that tone is even more extreme in Brotherhood, it is also present in the manga. Overall, this tone, combined with how quickly she stops feeling guilty, makes it seem like she didn't really feel that bad about what happened to Ed, or that worried about him being hospitalized. It more so seems like she was worried that he would find out she made a mistake. Now, I'm sure that wasn't the intent, as the rest of their exchanges in this section, and how she talks about the brothers to Hughes, makes it clear that she does care for them a lot. It's a shame that this comedic moment runs counter to a bunch of the good stuff in this section of the story. I think this part would have been more effective if the tone was a bit less wacky, and if she seemed less excited about the idea that she had gotten out of this without being found out. Fortunately, the rest of this arc is effective. Winry's discussion with Hughes really drives home how much she cares for the brothers, and how she wishes that they would let her do stuff to help them, or at least confide in her sometimes. She wants to be a part of their lives, but she consistently feels like she's being pushed out, and she's not exactly wrong. Additionally, though some people might take slight issue with the stereotypical nature of Hughes' advice that men are creatures that let their actions speak louder than words, it holds true as far as Ed and Al are concerned, and seems effective in helping Winry understand the brothers' mindset and why they might keep things from her, as to not worry her. Of course, he doesn't just leave it there though. He tells her that she is needed and that, when they do finally ask for her help, she'll need to be there for them. The heart of his advice is that, even if it doesn't feel like it all the time, she is integral to their lives. Immediately following this, the conflict between Ed and Al serves to show the truth in this. It also serves to show how, sometimes, words are necessary to get things across. After all, she tells Al that Ed is actually worried that Al might blame him for what happened, about the fact that he lost his body. Without her intervention, it's unclear how this problem would have been solved, or if it would have even been solved at all. Here she was integral. Still, she also learns by watching them fight and eventually make up without really talking about Al's worries, that they have their own way of communicating that generally seems effective to them. So we see some of her strengths, but we also see her grow as a character. Overall, though I think Al's identity crisis could have been handled better and that some aspects of Winry's development here are questionable, I appreciate where this takes Winry and what it shows us about her. Two 2003's take on Al's identity crisis shifts this focus from Winry to Al. That isn't to say that Winry gets no development here, or that her struggles and character aren't focused on. It's just that Al's actual emotional issues and his and Ed's relationship takes center stage. For now, let's focus on Al. As with many conflicts that are shared between 2003 and Mangahood, 2003 takes more time, adding in new material amongst the adapted stuff. Some of the anime original content does a solid job of emphasizing the key issues of this section. However, elongating this conflict also brings up a number of issues. First off, where Ed and Al make up in Mangahood, Al runs away instead, so his emotional reactions to this are even more extreme. Since I already had a problem with the basis of this conflict and how it was established, that means that putting more emphasis on it and refocusing a lot of attention away from Winry and onto Al puts a conflict I don't particularly like at center stage. Additionally, I think this makes the conflict slightly less believable. Sure, this whole thing was illogical in the first place, and that's part of the point, but he snapped out of it pretty easily in Mangahood. As soon as Winry brings up information that obviously contradicts his own feelings, he sorts himself out. Now, to be fair, more time has been spent on Al's struggle with this body, so this has been built up to more, which might make his more extreme reaction in this series make sense. However, even with that in mind, I think this takes it too far. I mean, Al goes as far as telling Scar that he doesn't care about his brother anymore. To have such a dramatic change occur because of a conflict that was at least slightly flawed from its introduction makes Al feel weak and emotional, and not in ways that also makes his character more interesting, at least to me. However, that isn't to say that everything about this is bad. In fact, there's some great material here. In particular, Rick and Ryo's story serves to accentuate Ed and Al's struggles in compelling ways. While Rick was also in Mangahood, his older brother Ryo was only in 2003. We learn that their mother was killed and that Ryo misunderstood the circumstances surrounding her death. See, Ryo saw their mother run away from them when the army attacked and has lived believing that their mother abandoned them. Because of this, he thinks of her as a coward who ran away in the hopes of saving herself instead of helping her sons. However, at the end of the episode, he learns that she had terrible eyesight, so she didn't run away to save herself. She ran away because she thought that they were in their bedroom, as she couldn't see them at the bottom of the stairs. One comparison that can be drawn here is that Ryo, similarly to Ed, is keeping a secret from his brother. Where Ryo believes that their mother was a coward, Ed believes that he hurt his brother and fears that his brother might blame him for what happened to his body. Sure, these two secrets are very different, but they're both secrets, and in both cases, the older brother is keeping something from the younger brother, in part because they want their relationship to be good. But in both cases, this just results in the relationship being more tense in the long run. Another comparison comes from the very idea of false memories themselves. After all, Ryo's memory is incorrect in that he misunderstood events so greatly that he came to the wrong conclusion about their meanings and content. Similarly, Al's skewed perspective has led him to believe something ridiculous. And in both cases, the boys have mistrusted a family member because of their incorrect perspective. Also, having the Ishvalans here at all ties this plot in with themes of family and belonging. As Rick and Ryo's grandpa says, the people of Ishval value blood relations above all else. So in his attempt to run away from his family, Al is confronted by people who have lost their family, and with the horrible effects this has had on their lives. Of course, this also holds true for Scar, who spends quite a bit of time with Al in this section, as they both go and try to save Rick after he's kidnapped. The show also uses this kidnapping as a way to help move Al's perspective back in a more positive and realistic direction, as Ryo so desperately wants to go save his brother. This is, of course, reminiscent of Ed's strong emotions for Al that we've seen throughout the entire series, and in particular, during the 5th laboratory. This episode leads to Rick nearly dying, as this dagger hits him in the chest during a battle. However, his mother's locket stops the dagger, and because it's damaged, it opens up, and that's when the boys find her eye medication. Obviously, this is contrived, exceptionally so. However, it does have an important meaning. Family has protected these brothers. Specifically, Rick's trust in his family has saved his life, as he kept wearing this locket, regardless of what his brother said. Once again, this is likely to make the audience think of Ed and Al's relationship, and of how important it is that they continue to trust one another, of how they've only stayed alive this long because they have one another, and because they trust in their family. In the end, this section does provide Al's character with a bit more depth, and manages to accentuate the brothers' relationship with these fallen people. So similarly to Mangahood's version of events, it's built on a cracked foundation, but has a lot of merit. Whether or not these positives outweigh the negatives will differ on an individual basis, but in both Mangahood and 2003, there are some good reasons why it was included. Well, now things are going to get a bit more tricky. We're very close to the diverging point where comparing these series chronologically just won't work very well. Based on rewatching the series again back-to-back really quickly, I decided that this is the best place to change how I'm going about things. So future videos won't be titled this way. It won't be Part 7, Part 8, Part 9. This is the last one that will be Fullmetal Alchemist vs Brotherhood, Part blank. Instead, these episodes are going to focus on the characters. Maybe on one or maybe on a bunch in one episode, but either way on the characters as they work across the entire series. This will still involve comparisons of the manga, Brotherhood, and 2003, but it will also involve more sections where I just focus on what these stories are trying to do on their own. However, these videos will still serve as continuations to this series. There will just be more openness in that you'll be able to watch them in whatever order you prefer. Of course, I'm still going to upload them in the order I think's best, but if you don't care about a certain character, you'll be able to hop in whenever you want to, as will newcomers. The videos will also be included in this playlist in their intended viewing order for anyone who wants to watch every single video in this series. With that, I guess it's time to move into a different format, and one that I hope will be just as interesting, or preferably even more interesting, to those of you who've kept up with this series. Let's get into the first character analysis.